侍の刀はな、鞘に収めるもんじゃねえ。てめえの魂に収めるもんだ。時代はもう侍なんざ必要としてねえがよ。どんなに時代が変わろうと、人には忘れちゃならねえもんがある。たとえ剣を捨てる時が来ても、魂に収めたまっすぐな剣だけはなくすな。
On my first viewing of Gintama, it took me nearly 6 months to get completely caught up on the parts of the series that were out at the time. And by the time I reached that point, I had completely forgotten about these lines from the beginning of episode 3. Or perhaps I just glossed over them because I didn't think they would be so significant. But coming back to the series now that it's almost over, it's clear that this line was meant to encapsulate the entirety of Gintama's ideology. Which, I admit, is a pretty bold statement to make about a show that has stuff like this. But hear me out. Gintama is known for many things. It's often heralded as the funniest anime ever written, which I would certainly agree with. There is not a single anime out there that can write a punchline nearly as outlandish or chaotically hilarious as Gintama. It's also held up as a master of meta-narrative, which is also true. Gintama can bend a story to its every whim and obliterate the fourth wall without a second thought, and yet still manages to keep viewers interested in the story going forward. It's no surprise that a manga writer who holds a degree in commercial advertising is so adept at understanding the fundamentals of what can hold a person's attention span the longest, but Sorachi is also a master of practically any genre he touches. This also extends to the anime staff as well, who have managed to create the only anime I know of where almost all of the filler is actually worth watching because it is so metatextual in nature, and all the more hilarious because of that. But those aren't the reasons why I love Gintama. Or rather, they're only part of the reason, because the biggest strength of Gintama is something much deeper and sadder. One of the most crucial elements of Gintama's setting is that it takes place in a post-war era. Now, this in itself is not exactly unique. Naruto is technically in a post-war setting as well, but what sets Gintama apart is that it's a post-war setting where our protagonists lost. The Leaf Village is back to a state of relative normalcy after the Third Ninja War because they came out on top, but Edo is not the same place it was after the Joy War. Japan, and Earth by proxy, lost the Joy War to an invasion of alien species known as the Amanto, forever changing how their society would function. This is an incredibly important distinction not only because it reflects and criticizes Japan's defeatist culture, but also because the Joy War and the Amanto invasion are directly representative of a fascinating merger of two pivotal endings in Japanese history. On the one hand, it is very obviously reminiscent of the Meiji Restoration, with the Joy War itself being a reference to the end of the Bakumatsu era and the fall of Edo. The sword ban and the last remnants of the Shinsengumi both form key building blocks of Gintama's Edo, and eventually, so does the end of the shogunate. But that doesn't really take the Amanto invasion into account. The real Edo didn't fall because it was invaded by foreigners, so where does that come in? Well, this is just my personal thoughts, but it appears as though this Meiji Restoration base also contains faint hints of post-World War II reconstruction elements, with the Amanto representing the American invasion and neutering of the Japanese government. America controlled Japanese politics for quite a while after World War II ended, and this is represented by the control that Tendoshu, a shadowy intergalactic organization, exerts over Edo, and again, Earth by proxy. I'd like to say that the similarities end there, and they do in some key areas, but then again, a conquest-driven organization that usurps sovereign governments in order to take control of their natural resources, which in Gintama is an energy source known as Altana, does certainly hit a little close to home. The point is that Gintama's version of the fall of Edo and the subsequent Amanto invasion represent a combination of two of Japan's greatest historical defeats, and this permeates practically every facet of Gintama's story. Even when it's crafting some of the greatest comedy anime has ever seen, Gintama is still a story of loss. Loss of home, loss of country, of family, of purpose, of freedom, of life itself. The first time I felt like I got a true taste of this came in episode 17 with the introduction of Gintama's genius inventor character, Gengai. During a local festival, a robot that Gengai created is used to attack the Shogun and the Shinsengumi, with this coming just after the first appearance of one of Gintama's main antagonists, Shinsuke, a former samurai aiming to topple the puppet shogunate controlled by the Amanto. But what really struck me about this episode was that Gengai is not some henchman of whatever designated antagonist group happens to be on screen. He's just an old man who's been left alone to play with his robots after losing his son in the Joy War when the government folded to the Amanto's demands, and thus has been coerced into seeking revenge on those who betrayed his son and left him to die. It's something that just sits at the pit of your stomach as you watch an old man with nothing left in his life desperately struggle for relief and purpose. And this is the basic template that sits at the core of almost every single character in Gintama. Everyone has lost something or someone. A husband, a teacher, their comrades, or even their identity. And Gintama is very good at tuning into that sadness and laying it bare. Despite being mostly a gag character for the majority of his screen time, the death of Shogun Shigeshige easily ranks amongst the saddest anime moments I've ever witnessed. This blundering fool who slowly grew into a shining beacon of hope for all of Edo and a pillar of political and moral justice, cut down without a shred of emotion, brought me to tears, and the immense dread that pervades the subsequent Farewell Shinsengumi arc seeped into my very soul. There is a lot of bad out there in the world, and sometimes no consequences are dealt out for those bad things. It can affect anyone, taking away something that you thought you could never live without, and many people just don't know what they're supposed to do to make things right again, or they lash out at others hoping to come out victorious. It's tempting to say that the answer is to fight back even if it costs you your life, but Gintama knows better than to blindly throw that out there. Instead, Gintama asks us to keep living, fighting internally until we reach that desired state of contentment. Standing by your ideals is important, but they mean nothing if you're dead, and so you should instead live on boldly displaying your ideals for all to see in the hopes of making the lives of others better, which is why Gintoki works as an odd jobs man rather than pursuing some lofty idea like revenge or revolution. The Kabuki district isn't just the place where Gintoki and the others hang out, it's their community, the people that they protect from danger and the people that they can fall back on when they need help. As the series goes on and Gintoki brightens the lives of more and more people, the Kabuki district becomes one of the strongest communities in all of anime, both physically and emotionally. These characters have to keep living, not just for themselves, but for each other. Only you can live your life and choose the path that you need to, but that doesn't mean that you can't ask for help along the way. And even if your physical home is destroyed, that only means that you should fight even harder to keep your emotional home, the people who make your life better simply by being there, safe from harm. Not just with the sword by your side, but the one in your heart as well. It might not be the answer you're looking for, but very often this is the truth that people need to hear. No matter what culture you come from, that idea that you need to fight back with all your might regardless of the consequences is a sorely tempting one, but it's not always the right choice. Sometimes, even if it's wrong, fighting back might actually be the easiest solution because you can focus solely on that end goal without coming to terms with the truth in your life.
戦が終わるのが怖えかよ。そいつが終われば英雄もただの人間に帰っちまう。だがそここそが本当の戦場だろう。
There is a lot more that could be said about Gintama, and I will definitely get to all of it eventually, but I want to end on what I perceive to be the fundamental core structure of Gintama's writing. On the one hand, Gintama is a tragedy. It has some of the saddest storylines I've ever seen in anime, and the sense of loss that pervades its setting is undeniable. But Gintama is also a comedy. Possibly the definitive anime comedy. Not just because it's got the best jokes, but because it plays those jokes against the immense sadness that permeates everything else. It's a story of pain and suffering, but also one of laughter and elation. It's the only story I know of where one of the main antagonists of the final arc can be defeated by repeatedly kicking him in the balls until he dies, and no one bats an eye because the show has built such an intensely empathetic relationship with the viewer through that dichotomy between comedy and tragedy. Life is sad, but it's also happy, and the amount of each of those in your life varies each day, which Gintama conveys to brilliant effect. It doesn't need a balance between them because life isn't balanced. None of these characters have perfectly constructed personalities or masterfully planned character arcs. They're still human, and humans aren't perfect and will never be perfect. But the fact that they try so hard and continue to persist day after day and year after year is more than enough. There is no heart of gold to be found within any of our main characters. They probably couldn't afford gold anyway. So instead, they'll just have to make do with a silver soul. And that's good enough. Okay, now that I've finally gotten that across, I think I'm finally ready to tackle one more video. Special thanks to Jan Rogalski, Rourketon Joing, Christine Seibert, Tim Johnson, Call Me Catlord, Diane Versbicki, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.